Hello and welcome. My name is Father William Maestri, and this is Overfed and Undernourished. The general topic, religious freedom. Specifically today, in installment number 5 of our 10-part series, it deals with the question, is religion essential? Now that particular question has gained traction, especially in recent times in this coronavirus environment, where we've begun to talk about what is essential and what is not essential. And this has raised more than a little controversy. For example, essential has meant abortion clinics. It has also meant liquor stores. It has meant stores that provide marijuana, and various other stores that open that were labeled essential, and they were given the rationale for them, and some of them even ended up in court, which showed you the level of controversy and debate that took place. A concern to many people was the labeling of religious assembly, worship, religion in general, as non-essential, and also the entrance of government in terms of limiting and even restricting, and in some instances forbidding, the gathering of people in their usual times and places of worship and in their usual manner, which brought up a whole host of questions concerning religious liberty, the free exercise, the non-establishment, limitations on government, was this government overreach, and a whole host of other related issues. And all of them were legitimate questions that we ought to be asking and ought to be discussing in a civil manner, in a respectful manner, but certainly they ought to be discussed and given serious consideration. And certainly the question of, is religion essential, is not simply an academic question. It's not something that we kind of kick around and intellectually debate and so on. It has to do with how we live as a people, especially in the United States, where religious liberty and liberty in general is always of great concern, not simply for individuals, but also for the society as a whole. And this will come as no surprise to you. My answer to the question, is religion essential? My answer is certainly in the affirmative. Yes, I think religion is essential. And you may very well say, well, of course you would say that. You're prejudiced. Well, let me say, I would like to think that I'm not prejudiced. I would like to think that I'm biased. And unfortunately today, we've collapsed those two words together, bias and prejudice. Prejudice means to prejudge, to already determine before any familiarity or any examination of evidence or ideas or the experience or testimony of someone. In other words, it's a closed-mindedness that simply does not even allow a discussion or presentation about various views on a topic or a situation. I think over the years, I might say decades, but I don't want to go that far. Over the years, I've become familiar with being Roman Catholic, or Christian, but also other religions and the function of religion in our republic, and certainly within the bounds of the Constitution. So I am biased. I lean towards, I favor. This is what I grew up in. This is what I was formed in. Much of my identity and hopefully my character in its better moments reflects Catholicism and reflects Christianity. So yes, I am biased, but I don't think it's a blind prejudice to the answer of the question before it's even examined. And I would like to ask you for your consideration, is religion essential? And I would like to address 3 areas. The theological area, the anthropological or human, what is man, what is the human person? And thirdly, the nature of a civil society that aims towards justice, respect for rights, the dignity of every single person, the sacredness of human life, and who really seeks to live in peace with one another, respecting the rights of each individual, their natural rights as well as their civil and their legal or statutory rights. So let's begin with the first area, theological, which of course begins with the question of God. God is the creator of the heavens and the earth, of all that is in it. The opening words of the book of Genesis. And all of the major religions have some form of the notion of a creator, a God, a supreme being, who brings all things into existence. And certainly from the standpoint of the Hebrew scriptures and connected to the Christian scriptures, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the crown of that creation, the apex of creation, is the creation of the human person, made in the image and likeness of God. And not only the image and likeness of God, but that mold of clay that God forms the human person out of, comes to life with the very life breath of God. It is simply lifeless. It has a form, but it has no life. It has no soul. It has no immortal soul until God breathes life into that figure, and that figure becomes the human person. That figure becomes man and woman. And that's important because men and women are complementary. And when God breathes into man, into that figure, into the human person, he breathes also intellect, free will, passions, because we are sensate beings as well, not simply all brain or all intellect. We have emotions and feelings and passions, which are very strong and powerful. And we're also by nature social. It is not good for man to be alone. So when we talk about God, we inevitably have to talk about the human person. Because for man to truly understand himself, man must understand his relationship with Almighty God. And we believe as Christians that Jesus Christ is the answer to what it means to be human, what it means to be fully human and fully alive. Always that vertical relation as well, relationship with God. And these are the fundamental elements of the human person, the fundamental components: reason, intellect, passion, and sociality. Those elements are indispensable. If you get rid of those, you may have an android or a robot, but you do not have a human being. You do not have the human person. And because the human person is made by God, fashioned by God, is filled with the very life breath of God, every single human life, from the moment of conception to the point of natural death and all points in between, regardless of all the external conditions, status, race, creed, color, age, economics, intellect, beauty, power, all of those, at the end of the day, it comes down to the core of what the human being is. That is, that being made in the image and likeness of God, and every single person seeks the truth and seeks to be free and seeks to live in community in a just and peaceable and free way, one to the other. Anything that goes against that is, in fact, an assault on the dignity of the human person. Anytime we are denied knowledge, anytime we are presented errors, that which is not true, we wound the dignity of the person, whether that be through political regimes, whether it be through lies that we tell one another interpersonally. We wound the dignity of the human person. The same with freedom. Every time we, in fact, coerce, every time we impose either a regime or an individual will of one person over another, the strong over the weak, the rich over the poor, the influential over those who lack resources, that is a wound on the dignity and sacredness of the human person and of life. And every time we exclude, every time for reasons that are unjust, race, creed, color, religion, etc., all of those qualifications, to exclude is also to go against the very nature and dignity of the human person. And therefore, we have to understand what God created, who God created, the human person, and the great dignity of the human person. And because the human person is social and is called to live in community, is called to live in groups, is called to live together, the question of government naturally arises. The question of government arises because as obviously populations grow, has history developed, social arrangements, social structures, social communities become more complex. Issues become more complex. And therefore, as man's consciousness developed, has his understanding of having to deal with the complexity of an ever-expanding and evolving life, there came the need for government. There came the need for government. And that always raises the question of, well, what kind of government? What kind of government? Well, it must be a government that is just, free, inclusive, and seeks peace, and is expansive in welcoming new members into that society, into that civil arrangement, according to just expectations, standards, requirements, and also extend the privileges and laws to all the members of that particular society. And so we understand that reason and intellect, the passions, and our social nature, it can be misused for evil. Because even in the Garden of Eden, the serpent was present. The intellect can be diverted to very brilliant, very intelligent, a genius, but it can also be an evil genius. And history has given us many examples. The 20th century is full of them. Nazism and communism, the killing fields, and all of those other regimes that were unjust, that were really wounds and denial of the inalienable natural rights of vast numbers of people engaged in many instances mass killing of people on the basis of race or creed, color, and all of those things. That's a perversion because sin is present. We can misuse our freedom. We can misuse our freedom to make bad choices individually. We can choose sin over grace, vice over virtue, evil over good. That's the capacity and that's the responsibility of having a free will. But that's God's gift to us. And with that, of course, comes responsibility and accountability for that kind of stewardship of the kind of being we are. A rational, free, passionate, and social being. So all of those elements are present there. And the question, of course, is what kind of society, what kind of life do we want to live together? How do we want to foster that? And my suggestion to you, and I think history shows this, is that religion has been a force for good overall. Now, some people may say, and maybe more than some, a lot of people may say, yes, but you're overlooking the evil. Well, no, I just said that reason and evil, and free will rather, can be structured or turned towards, can be corrupted towards that which is evil and dehumanizing, and that which goes against the sanctity of life. History is full of that. History is full of that. Remember, the Bible tells us that the first murder occurred within the family. Cain killing Abel. That's the first sin after the fall, is the sin of murder. And the spilling of innocent blood. that cried to the heavens. And the result of that was Cain, of course, became a wanderer on the face of the earth. This is what happens when our will and our intellect, these great gifts, our passions of jealousy and envy and resentment rise up. This is what happens. Murder and destruction. There's no question. And religion, there are many people who have wrapped themselves in religion and have done hideous things, terrible things in the name of religion. But that's a perversion of religion. That's certainly not the teaching in the scriptures. It's not a teaching in the Hebrew scriptures. It's not a teaching in the, certainly not the New Testament in the life of Christ. It's not a teaching that has come to us down through the Christian, the Jewish, and in many other forms of religion, who have sought to live peaceably, respectfully, justly, freely with one another. And I think that some of the great forces of respecting life, seeking justice, inclusion, freedom, drawing people together in the pursuit of peace, have come through peace. Let me, if I may, just give you three brief examples. Nazism in World War II had, as you know, a tremendous amount of concentration camps, which were really death camps. And I want to talk about two individuals, very briefly. Maximilian Kolbe, a Catholic priest, who was in a death camp with a number of other people, suffered terribly, beaten, starved, abused by the Nazi guards and those who were his tormentors, really, because of his belief in Christ. And one day the guards came in to his section of the camp, and they picked out 10 men who were going to be executed that day. And one of which was a poor peasant, but he worked very hard. He was a baker, I believe. He had a family and he had children. And it was heartbreaking. He was pleading for his life for the sake of his family, and talked about his family with the guards, which of course was to no avail. Maximilian Kolbe came forward and said, "I will take his place. You want 10. You want 10, I'll be the 10th person." And they took Kolbe and they killed him in the place of this man. A real Christ-like act. So much so that many of the Nazi guards wept. And many of the Nazi guards later actually converted to Christianity because of the example of Maximilian Kolbe. And when Pope John Paul II, now Saint Pope John Paul II, canonized Maximilian Kolbe, that priest who took the place of that man in that concentration camp. That man, whom he took his place, that man was there in St. Peter's Square at the canonization of Maximilian Kolbe. That one example of someone who, in the name of Christ, in the name of the gospel, influenced many, many people in that particular camp. That one life. The second example is the Lutheran minister, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's had a tremendous influence even to today. People continue to read his writings, his sermons. He was a Lutheran pastor, and he was at the forefront of resistance to Hitler and to Nazism. In fact, what put him in jail was he was very articulate, very intelligent, and he had a weekly program. And on that particular program, they were pushing Adolf Hitler to be called the Führer, the leader, the supreme leader, almost godlike, a kind of savior and messiah. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer had been critical of Nazism and of Hitler, and where the Christian church was going, because there was also the establishment church that was going along with this Nazism. They were. And Bonhoeffer was part of the confessional church, the resistance church. And just before the Nazi guards broke in to take down the broadcast and to disconnect the microphone, which was heard by hundreds of thousands of Germans, Jews and Christians, Bonhoeffer's last words were this: "We have only one Führer, and his name is Jesus Christ." And with that, he was unplugged, he was taken off, and on Christmas, on Easter, April of 1945, 2 weeks before the troops from the Allied countries entered Berlin, at the Flossenburg prison, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was hanged. And on the way out to be hanged, his Nazi captors, who had watched him for these years, they actually wept openly along with his fellow prisoners. And he said to them on his way to the gallows, he said, Don't weep, don't weep. For me, this is not the end. It is really the beginning." And so in those two lives, we saw the tremendous power of religion to bring about conversion. Now we may say, well, that was just small, 2 examples, and so on and so forth. Multiply that by the thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have made a difference in terms of respecting human life, respecting the dignity of each person, speaking out on behalf of true justice, of freedom, and of seeking peace. Multiply that. And you see that, and they were motivated by their love of God and love of neighbor, believing that that's what God put us here on earth for. So I think religion has indeed made a tremendous contribution. And the third and final example that I would like to give you is the example of Pope Pius XII. Pope Pius XII has been terribly and scandalously besmirched for many, many years. That record is now being changed, has more and more records from the Vatican are declassified, as well as Nazi records are being uncovered. And the leading researcher is a Jewish rabbi who said that at the least, the work of Pope Pius XII in supporting and providing escape for Jews was well over 750,000. 750,000. And a scandalous book came out right after the war entitled Hitler's Pope. It was promulgated by the Russians, especially by Stalin, who hated religion, hated God, turned away from his own Christian background, and was really an enemy of religion, as he killed millions of his own people, starved them to death. And Pius just kept doing what he was doing, saving people's lives. In this case, Jews who were scheduled for execution, extermination. That was the plan, that was the goal. And yet the Pope did not reveal, did not become involved in public controversies and so on. He just kept saving lives. Three people, a Lutheran, a Catholic priest, and a Pope, all who made a difference in the 20th century on behalf of life and the dignity of the human person. In the most trying and oppressive and dangerous situations, they still talked about a God who they believed was active in the world, a God who loves and a God who cares. Fast forward into into the civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s in this particular country. Many of the causes of justice and freedom and respect for life today. Those who defend life in all its forms, from the womb to the tomb. For those who stand up for equality under law, want the mighty waters of justice to flow. Those who speak out and witness against oppression in various regimes around the world today in this 21st century, where Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and other religions are oppressed, restricted, people are dying rather than give up their religious belief, their witness. And so it seems to me that is religion essential? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because you see, I think religion in its true form, religion in its true form, is that which brings people together to proclaim the dignity of the human person made in the image and likeness of God. And I think that that's a very, very powerful thing. And no government, no politician, no leader can deny that religion is essential, because to do that is to ultimately deny God and that which is inherent in the human person has made in the image and likeness of God. We can have our restrictions, we can have our shutdowns, we can do all of that, but God will continue to be worshipped. People will continue to respond to those nobler, truthful, just, and free impulses that live within the heart of each and every person, because each and every person desires what is true. Truth. Truth wins out over error, has good wins out over evil. Not instantly, not miraculously. It's often twilight's long struggle, but eventually that's what happens. And I think at this particular moment in our own history, we find ourselves, I think, in a time of trial. And every trial, the outcome is always a decision. And the question is, what is the decision we will make? And I think more and more, especially as we move into the 21st century, the decision comes down to what Pope John Paul II again placed before us decades ago. One is either going to be building the culture of death, which is too much with us, discarded life. Some lives matter more than others. The dignity of each person depends upon whether or not they qualify according to some standard. Or is there an inherent dignity and worth to each and every human life? We have become, unfortunately, in many instances, too cavalier about how we treat, especially the vulnerable, the poor, the sick, the elderly, the dying, the unborn and the born, the newborn. We count some lives as of greater value based upon some human standard. That aids and abets the culture of death. Or are we going to walk that path, long and winding, difficult, in building the civilization of life and love? That's our decision. And each and every one of us makes that decision right within the particularity of our own circumstance and that little bit of the world that we touch each and every day. But may those who are still held in the womb of time and are yet to be born, may they stand on our shoulders and see further may they see deeper, and may they see longer in building the civilization of life and love.